Imagine waking up tomorrow and every modern truck on the highway is completely dead. Not broken down, not out of fuel, just dead. The screens are blank, the engines will not crank, and not a single load is moving anywhere in the country. Most people would immediately start worrying about food shortages, fuel shortages, supply chain collapse. But a small group of truck drivers and mechanics would be walking very calmly out to their driveways, climbing into something old, loud, and completely unbothered, and driving away without a single problem. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and this is Trucks United. What is a grid collapse, and why should truckers care? In the simplest terms, a grid collapse is a large-scale failure of the electrical power infrastructure. It could be caused by a natural disaster, a cyber attack on power stations, or something even more dramatic like an electromagnetic pulse, commonly called EMP. An EMP is a burst of electromagnetic energy that can fry electronic circuits across a very wide area. It can come from a high-altitude nuclear detonation, a solar flare, or specialized military weapons designed for that purpose. Now here is where it gets interesting for the trucking world. You might be thinking, okay Jeremy, trucks run on diesel, not electricity. So what is the problem? That is a fair question. The problem is that trucks built after a certain point are absolutely loaded with electronics. We are talking about engine control modules, sensors, onboard diagnostics, emission systems, digital dashboards, electronically controlled fuel injection, and the list goes on. In a grid collapse scenario, and especially in an EMP event, those electronics do not just switch off temporarily. They can be destroyed permanently. A truck with a destroyed engine control module is not a truck anymore. It is a very large, very expensive piece of useless metal sitting on the side of the road. The military has known this for decades. That is exactly why military vehicles are designed with hardened electronics, or in some cases, no electronics at all. It turns out the trucking world has its own version of that solution, and it was not designed on purpose. It was just how things were built before the industry got complicated. Pre-OBD Advantage explained, to understand why certain trucks have such a massive advantage in a scenario like this, you need to understand what OBD actually is and when it changed everything. OBD stands for Onboard Diagnostics. It is a computerized self-monitoring system built into the vehicle that tracks engine performance, emissions output, sensor readings, and a whole range of other data points. The first generation, known as OBD1, started appearing in some vehicles in the 1980s. But it was OBD2 that really standardized everything and made it mandatory in the United States in 1996 for passenger vehicles. For heavy-duty trucks, the transition happened in stages. But by the early 2000s, electronic engine management had become the standard across the industry. Before that transition, truck engines were largely mechanical, and I want you to really think about what that means. A mechanical diesel engine does not need a computer to tell it how much fuel to inject. It does not need sensors reporting back to a module. It does not need a software update. The fuel system works on physical pressure, mechanical timing, and basic chemistry. Diesel goes in, compression happens, combustion happens, the engine runs, that is it. Now some people in the comments will immediately say, well Jeremy, even older trucks have some electrical components, the starter motor, the alternator, the lighting systems. And that is true. But there is a massive difference between basic electrical components like a starter motor and a fully integrated electronic engine management system. Basic electrical components can be shielded, replaced, or in some cases, bypassed. An engine control module that has been fried by an electromagnetic pulse cannot be bypassed. It is gone. This is what people in the survivalist and military communities call the pre-onboard diagnostics advantage. The older the truck and the more mechanically pure its engine system is, the less vulnerable it is to electronic disruption of any kind. And when you start looking at the specific trucks and engine combinations that best represent this advantage, 3 names keep coming up over and over again. So let us get into them. Truck number 1, the pre-electronic Freightliner with a mechanical Cummins. The first truck on this list is the pre-electronic Freightliner Classic, or FLD series, specifically the versions built in the 1980s and early 1990s paired with a mechanical Cummins engine, most commonly the N14 or the Big Cam series. Now, the Freightliner FLD is not exactly a glamorous truck. It is not the one guys are out there spending money to put on a poster in their garage. But do not let that fool you, because what this truck represents from a pure engineering and survivability standpoint is remarkable. The Cummins N14 in its mechanical form. I want to be specific because Cummins later made electronic versions of the N14. The mechanical version uses a PT fuel system. PT stands for pressure and time, and that describes how the fuel injection works. Fuel is supplied at a controlled pressure, and the injectors are open for a controlled amount of time. There is no electronic signal telling any of this to happen. It is governed by mechanical components, by physical pressure, and by the rotation of the camshaft. The engine genuinely does not know or care whether there is a functioning power grid on the other side of the windshield. The Freightliner FLD platform itself is also worth talking about because it is built on a fairly straightforward chassis without a lot of the integrated electronics you would find in later designs. The cab is functional, the systems are simple, and crucially for our scenario, most of the components on this truck can be diagnosed and repaired with hand tools and a basic understanding of diesel mechanics. You do not need a laptop. You do not need a dealer scan tool. You do not need to call anyone. There is a reason why these trucks still show up in remote parts of Africa, South America, and Central Asia doing real work every single day. They are not there because they are fancy. They are there because they are unkillable. And in a grid collapse situation, unkillable is exactly what you want. I will take boring and reliable over high-tech and dead every single time. And I think most of you would agree. Truck number 2, the Kenworth W900 with a mechanical Caterpillar. If the Freightliner FLD is the practical choice on this list, then the Kenworth W900 with a mechanical Caterpillar engine is the legendary choice. And honestly, this combination might be the single most celebrated pairing in the history of American trucking. The W900 has been in continuous production since 1961. Let that sink in for a moment. 1961. That is not a typo. The basic design of this truck has been around for over 60 years, and Kenworth still makes it today. That tells you something about how much the industry respects what this truck represents. But for our purposes today, we are specifically talking about the W900, built through the 1980s and into the mid-1990s, paired with the Caterpillar 3406B, or the early mechanical versions of the 3406E. The CAT. 3406 is one of those engines that people talk about the way some people talk about classic muscle cars. It is an inline 6-cylinder mechanical diesel that produces between 300 and 550 horsepower depending on the configuration, and it is famous for 2 things above everything else: power and durability. The mechanical fuel injection system on the 3406 is driven by a dedicated fuel injection pump that is mechanically timed to the engine. There are no solenoids receiving electronic signals. There is no engine control module deciding how much fuel to deliver. The injection pump is a purely mechanical device responding to throttle position and engine speed. From an EMP vulnerability standpoint, this engine is about as close to immune as you can get in a full-size commercial truck. Now, I do want to mention, and some of you CAT fans already know this, that Caterpillar introduced electronic controls into the 3406E in the early 1990s, and later versions of that engine are not what we are talking about here. We are talking about the earlier mechanical versions, the ones where a good mechanic can rebuild the injection pump on the side of the road if they have to. The ones that were running before anybody knew what a fault code was. Pair that engine with the W900's simple, robust chassis. Its conventional long-nose design that puts the engine out front where you can actually work on it without doing gymnastics. And you have a truck that in a post-grid collapse world would be worth more than almost anything else with wheels. And it looks good doing it, which honestly is not nothing. Truck number 3, the Mack R series. The third truck on this list does not always get the attention it deserves in these conversations, and that is a genuine shame, because the Mack R series might actually be the toughest, most overbuilt truck ever to come out of an American factory. The R series was produced from 1966 all the way through 2002. That is a 36-year production run. Think about how many things changed in the world between 1966 and 2002. Mack just kept building essentially the same truck because there was simply no reason to stop. What makes the R series so relevant to our discussion is the Mack ENDT 673 engine. This is the engine most commonly associated with this platform, and it is one of the most mechanically straightforward diesel engines ever put into a production truck. Mack built this engine almost entirely in-house. Their own design, their own components, their own fuel system, and for most of its production life, it was completely mechanical. The Mack fuel system on these engines uses a unit pump injection system, where each cylinder has its own individual pump driven directly off the camshaft. There is no central high-pressure rail. There is no electronic pressure regulation. Each injection event is triggered purely by the mechanical movement of the camshaft lobe against the pump follower. It is almost beautifully simple when you think about it. The R series cab is also something worth mentioning. It is built from fiberglass and steel with an almost ridiculous level of structural integrity. Drivers who have worked in these trucks for decades will tell you the same thing. Nothing breaks on an R series that a good mechanic cannot fix. Parts are still available. The design has not fundamentally changed in decades. And there is a very active community of Mack enthusiasts who have kept the knowledge of these trucks alive and well. In a grid collapse situation, the Mack R series is not just a truck that would keep running. It is a truck that could be kept running almost indefinitely by someone with the right skills and a decent supply of spare parts. That is a very different thing from just surviving the initial event. The R series is built for the long haul, literally and figuratively. Why modern trucks would fail? Now, let us talk about the other side of this conversation, because understanding why these 3 trucks would survive also means understanding exactly why modern trucks would not. A current production semi-truck, your 2020 or 2025 model Peterbilt, Volvo, Kenworth, Freightliner, these are phenomenal machines in normal operating conditions. They are more fuel efficient, more powerful, cleaner, and more comfortable than anything built in the 1980s. Nobody is arguing against that, but they are also deeply comprehensively dependent on electronics to function at the most basic level. The engine will not run without the ECM receiving correct signals from multiple sensors. The fuel injection system is common rail, operating at pressures of over 2,000 bar, and every injection event is electronically triggered with microsecond precision. The aftertreatment system, which includes the diesel particulate filter and the selective catalytic reduction system that uses diesel exhaust fluid, is monitored and controlled by its own dedicated control module. The transmission is electronically controlled. The braking system is electronically managed. Even the throttle pedal is not mechanically connected to anything on most modern trucks. It sends an electronic signal. That is it. In an EMP scenario, every single one of these systems goes offline simultaneously. And unlike a dead battery, you cannot just recharge a fried ECM. You cannot reset a destroyed sensor. The truck is not going to start. It is not going to move. And there are no replacement ECM units sitting in a warehouse somewhere if the grid is down and supply chains are not functioning. This is not a criticism of modern trucks. It is simply the reality of how they are engineered and what they require to operate. The same complexity that makes them efficient and clean in normal conditions also makes them fragile in extreme ones. Could this actually happen? Now, the honest question you are probably asking yourself is, Jeremy, is this actually realistic? Is a grid collapse scenario something we genuinely need to think about? And the answer, maybe surprisingly, is yes. Not necessarily in the Hollywood overnight catastrophe sense, but in a very real, documented, studied sense. The United States government, NATO, and various defense research bodies have published extensively on the vulnerability of modern infrastructure to both cyber attacks and electromagnetic pulse events. In 2019, a congressional report specifically warned that a significant electromagnetic pulse event over North America could affect virtually every electronic system across the country simultaneously. We have also already seen smaller-scale examples of what happens when critical infrastructure is disrupted. The Colonial Pipeline cyber attack in 2021 shut down fuel supplies across the southeastern United States within days, not because the physical pipeline was damaged, but because the digital systems controlling it were compromised. The physical infrastructure was fine. The electronics were not. Militaries around the world take this very seriously. The United States military specifically maintains a fleet of older, mechanically simpler vehicles, precisely because of electromagnetic pulse vulnerability concerns. Specialized military units train with equipment that has been hardened against electromagnetic disruption because the people making those decisions understand exactly what happens to a modern vehicle in that environment. The pre-onboard diagnostics advantage is not a fantasy. It is a real, documented, studied engineering reality. The trucks on this list are not valuable simply because they are old. They are valuable because the way they were built happens to make them immune to a category of failure that modern trucks cannot survive. So to bring it all together, the reason these three trucks stand apart in a grid collapse scenario comes down to one fundamental thing. They were built before the industry decided that computers needed to be involved in every single function of a working diesel engine. The pre-electronic Freightliner with a mechanical Cummins, the Kenworth W900 with a mechanical Caterpillar 3406, and the Mack R series with its mechanically injected ENDT engine. These are not just old trucks. They are trucks whose engineering philosophy happens to make them uniquely resilient in a world where complexity has become a vulnerability. Now, of course, most of you are probably not planning for a grid collapse, and that is completely fine. But understanding why these trucks work the way they do and why the industry moved away from that simplicity tells you something really important about the trade-offs that go into every design decision in this industry. There is always a trade-off, always. So let me ask you, do you think modern trucks have gotten too dependent on electronics? And if things did go sideways tomorrow, which truck would you want parked in your driveway? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe to Trucks United for much more.